Although 30 years had passed, I didn't expect to find my mother's other cousin, Armida, so white-haired and wrinkled, and from the way she hugged and kissed me and shook her head, I could tell that she too had expected my younger self. Several times as we caught up on family news, on my children and her grandchildren and all the deaths, the list was long, Armida paused and gave me an appraising look. Finally she said, "You've put on the pounds and the years. Once you were a flower." Her comments on my lost youth bothered me, not just because they were true, but because I knew she would pass them on to her son, with whom I had once been infatuated, as enchanted with him as I had been with Lucino. I did not point out how she had changed. I exclaimed over the house, which was no longer a fisherman's cottage, but had been renovated and shone from top to bottom. "I didn't need this," Armida said. "Not now when I'm old, but my son insisted. He comes as much as he can with his family. It's hard for me to go to him in Koper. It's another country now. It's Slovenia. There's a border, so it's off the bus and passports, then back on the bus. No, I'm too old. My legs." She brought me pictures of the grandsons to admire, and a poem the oldest one had written in Italian, a hymn to the rocks and the sea of the island. "He won a prize," she said. Boruth, her mouth twisted. It took me years to learn how to pronounce it. Not one of our names. And then I didn't plan it, but I was at the grocer's buying a little coffee. It wasn't so expensive then. He asked me about the new baby, and I said his name was Davide. Armida looked embarrassed. Then I told everyone Boruth was Davide, even Mario, her husband. May he rest in peace, called him Davide. Till that summer, my daughter-in-law was walking the baby, and everyone came out and started making a fuss, calling him Davide. Then they made me call him Boruth. Though I think they learned something, because they called the second one Leonardo. I asked Armida, as I had asked Maria Letic, on which side her father, my grandfather, had fought in the First War. "Austria," Armida said. "No, Italy." Who knows? Maria had not known either. Armida and I were sitting on her terrace overlooking the inlet of Ravenska, rows of small white boats below us, a stretch of pine woods, then a sandy beach to the right, and ahead the stone jetty built by Archduke Maximilian, who went on to become the Emperor of Mexico. I pointed out that despite her Croatian husband and son, she spoke of them and us. As far back as I can remember, it has always been them and us. We called them Slavi, and they called us Chiogiotti. Surely all the Italians weren't from Chioggia, I said, referring to the town on the edge of the Venetian lagoon. Maybe originally hundreds of years ago, and lots didn't fit into them and us. Some were Austrians and Hungarians. I had seen the census going back to 1880. We had separate dance halls, Armida continued, and every now and then there would be a big fight. A rumble, I thought. You never danced together? How did you start with your husband? You're right. We would talk in the piazza, and then he started coming to our dances. I wasn't the only one. Oh no, there's always been lots of intermarriage. Hard to keep them straight, I would have thought. But I said, "You never learned Croatian?" I tried not to sound disapproving. Everyone spoke our language, and by the time they didn't. But marrying into a Croatian family. I didn't want to. Honaze. Their dialect sounded ugly to me. It wasn't proper Croatian, you know. Neither is our language proper Italian. When I went to Rijeka, to the clinic, the heart specialist and the nurses, they asked Antonio, "How can it be that your mother doesn't speak Croatian?" So we had to explain how it used to be. Circe was not the only witch associated with Lucino. In classical antiquity, until the Romans dug a canal at Osor, the islands of Cherso and Lucino were one island called Asperides, for Apsritos, the brother of the witch Medea. The myth claimed that Medea killed her brother on this island and scattered his limbs across the sea to save Jason from her father. Medea knew that her father would stop and weep over his son's remains, and Jason and his Argonauts would be able to sail away. The island of Asperides was where a sister turned against her brother, where blood betrayed blood for a false blood. As soon as he felt better, Marco suggested we cut our trip short and go back to Venice. I was growing tired. Trying to discover the true nature of Losange was making me feel as if I were a child again, straining to see through a white net and decipher the darkness beyond. When I returned to Armida's with Marco, she chattered, though in Italian rather than the Istro Veneto, even more than the first time. "What can I offer you?" Fetching coffee and aniseed cookies, uncorking a bottle of white wine, then one of pear brandy. "Drink, eat, drink, drink," she said. "Isn't this a view?" The three of us sat and stared at the curve of the bay, the blinding blue bordered by pale yellow sand. Beside and below us, on the surface at least, a model of the fishing port turned holiday village, a scattering of small yachts, a restaurant awning barely covering the sprawl of tables on the quay, and spruced-up houses, plastered and painted with green shutters and geranium-filled flower boxes. Armida had sprayed herself with the cologne we had brought her, and I was surrounded by the spicy floral scent. And she brought out her grandson's poem again, this time so that Marco could read and admire it. And she talked and talked. I prompted her with questions, but I avoided guiding her or putting words in her mouth. She wandered from memory to memory, doubling back at times, taking sudden turn-offs. The red and yellow sails on her father's boats, the cornmeal diet in the war, her heart condition. My mother when she was young, my grandmother when she was old, and me, what a bossy and articulate toddler I was. She complained that she couldn't get good coffee in Losange, that her pension did not arrive for months at a time, that she was alone. Oh, her husband's family checked on her, cooked for her if she wasn't well. Like Maria, she didn't go to church anymore. On Sundays she stayed home and watched the Mass on TV in Italian. Antonio had got her a satellite dish, so she got all the Italian channels. I hardly know anyone anymore. The town is full of strangers. Your mother is lucky she lives with you, and you can take care of her. I don't think she realizes. I felt a twinge of guilt. I flashed to my mother, who was in respite care at the General Hospital during my absence. I saw her bibbed and belted into her wheelchair, her eyes confused, lost. Armida flipped back to 1950 when her husband was taken away for 3 months of forced labor. Everyone had to go. Then the soldiers with the red star on their caps came to her door and told her she had no right to be here. She must be gone in 24 hours. She was married, 5 months pregnant. At least the soldiers didn't come in the night, as they did for some. Some people would say they weren't worried. Their consciences were clear. Then you'd never see them again. Someone had denounced them. A neighbor who coveted their land, we used to think. Or someone they had crossed maybe years before. It was a time of revenge. "What did you do?" Marco asked. Luckily, my husband's family had some connections who produced the right papers. "False papers?" I asked. She shrugged. I became officially a Croat. Slavicized, Italianized, people here had been shifting, changing their identities for at least 100 years. Your proclaimed nationality depended on convenience or, if times were good, on your vision of yourself. "You're sure," she said as I wrote in my notebook, "that no one here will read what I say?" When I had phoned her from Hotel La Punta, when I told her I would like her to talk about her life, she'd been surprised. "Why do you want to know?" And now she continued to ask me, "Who will see what you write? Will anyone here know?" I reassured her yet again. I'm sure no one here will see it, here or in Italy, thinking of the number of books I'd sold the previous year. And not many in North America. I'll change your name, if that makes you feel better. That won't fool them. They'll know who I am. I thought she was paranoid, but she had lived her life under fascism and then communism, and I had not. Despite her fears, however, she was elated by this chance to tell her story, and her excitement fueled her words. What else do you want me to tell you? What else do you want to know? What else? I was waiting for a revelation, the meaning of her life in this place. More, I was waiting, wanting to capture what was hidden behind the stone walls, inside the silent, locked villas under the crumbling roofs. A dark truth, like truffles clustered on the roots of oak trees, like spores infesting the blood-colored earth. A luminous truth, like the darting, dancing light of the phosphorescence in Rovenska Bay. The truth now and the truth then. Once. The word echoed in my head. Once. The mix of wine and bitter coffee left me lightheaded. Mario made lots of money ferrying those who left, Armida was saying. For months he sailed to Italy, his boat overloaded. I was afraid the whole time that he'd capsize. You wouldn't believe what people tried to take with them. The local representatives of the Yugoslav government would not allow the exiles to take anything deemed of value: money, jewelry, paintings, Turkish rugs, or Chinese porcelain. Nor many objects of emotional worth: books, an accordion, a record player, a demijohn of wine, a drum of olive oil, a plow, a shovel, a scythe, a lantern, a sewing machine, wood-stuffed mattresses, wooden chairs, feather comforters, copper pots, dishes, silver rubbed with dirt and ashes so it looked like tin, a bicycle. A mountain of things were abandoned on the quay, surrendered because there was no room in the boats. Mario took my parents and then each of my brothers to Trieste. Silvio and Miro, I never saw them again. For the first time, Armida sounded old and tremulous. As the sun set in that round, red ball of a moment, I could feel the fear of those in the boats, the urge to flee, abandoning possessions, homes, family, sailing away from their lives, their language, their ancestors, who had been always with them in the earth under their feet. The past, their past, was gone. On sailboats and fishing boats and ferries, in carts driven by oxen, in the military trucks, the Americans had left behind, night after night, for months, for years. They fled the towns, the islands, the mainland cities. And those who remained, they too were afraid, walking the deserted streets, stunned and alone. And they too, though they never left their homeland, they too lost it. And this is the quote: I feel I am a stranger in my own country, the wrong kind of Italian. And that's from an Italian Istrian poet, Quaranotti Gambini, said in an interview. The next morning I gave in. We would cut the trip short and leave the following day. I had wanted to check the archives in Mali Losinj for records of my grandparents, but Maria Letic had explained that the old archives, like those of most of the towns in Istria, had all been burned in a supposedly accidental fire. Both she and Ermida insisted that the priest would never let me see the parish records. We took a final tour of the graveyard behind the church overlooking the sea. Neither of my grandparents was buried there, but I wanted to see the graves of Zia Cecilia and Zia Giuditta. The graveyard was austere, no trees, and only one family chapel. A dry stone wall marked the circumference. The paths were beaten red earth, the headstones gray marble or white stone. There was a small oval picture of Zia Cecilia on her headstone, hair white but thick, chin up, earrings dangling. On her grave, a circle of white lilies. Again, I wished I had asked her questions when I'd had the chance. The dates on the stones went back several hundred years. In some graveyards during the time of the Foibe, the Italian names were chipped out of the headstones. Here, they were unmolested. Back and back. A Raguzin married a Gladovich. A Penso married a Simonich. A Lanza and a Baricevic, a Letic and a Pagan. Everyone I had spoken to before I had come to Losinj, and since I had been here, made clear divisions: exiles and rimasti, Slavs and Chiogiotti, Rio Lucignani and new settlers, Italians, Croats, Serbs, and lately Bosnians. Them and us. But here in the graveyard, one category merged into the next. The house where my mother was born was across the road from the one where Maria Letic lived. At the end of my second visit, she and I stood outside the tall green gate and rang the bell. Once, Maria said, beginning a story I'd heard before, once there was an orange tree in your grandparents' garden, and that led to their name in Lucino, Ponaronzo, those of the orange tree. When no one answered, with Maria's encouragement, I unlatched the gate and stepped into the garden. The house looked solid, secure, and substantial, but it was eclipsed by the magnificent tree that stretched taller than the roof. Nestled in the green, shiny leaves were small, bright, bitter oranges. Once there was an orange tree. Once. Still. This time the word was still, even if the family had changed. Or could this be another tree, a replacement or an offspring? Now I go into a flashback. I imagine my mother's birth, so I'll read that. I see children, my aunts and uncles under the boughs of the tree. Two of the boys wrestle, howling, rolling back and forth over the roots. The oldest girl, Marici, tries to reprimand them. She has a book open on her lap. Inea, I recognize her immediately. Even as a child, she has a big nose. Inea dangles a baby on her hip. A toddler is trying to cram an entire unpeeled orange into his mouth. I look back at the silent, shuttered house. In a bedroom on the second floor, I see my grandmother, her black hair soaked in sweat, her face twisted in pain. The shutters are open. The sunlight pours in across the bloodied sheets, the matrimonial bed. She is laboring to deliver her seventh child. Stoically, her lips are clamped shut. But the midwife talks, and the mother-in-law prays. Finally, the baby, who was turned the wrong way, has righted herself and is coming. Now her scream penetrates the window, tosses the leaves and branches. The children stop. Each one of them looks up. This place is where my mother began. Memories and stories, mine and my mother's and my aunt's, the memoirs I have read, the exiles' newsletters, the internet postings, memories and stories, two glowing ropes that intertwine and separate, slip by each other and knot over the dark pit, the foiba of forgetfulness.
Hello. I'm going to read today from the Office Tower Tales, which is my riff on the Canterbury Tales. And the story I'm going to read is called The Office Romeo's Tale. Most of the stories in this volume don't follow Chaucer's originals too closely, but this one has some echoes of the Nun's Priest's Tale, which, if you remember, is the one where the